Get out of my kitchen right now. My mother-in-law screamed those exact words while standing in the center of the custom marble island I paid for. She had a wooden spoon pointed at my face and was using my imported ingredients to cook for her side of the family. Instead of defending me, my husband leaned against the doorframe and started clapping. That is right, Mom. Finally, someone put her in her place. He thought he had the upper hand that Thanksgiving morning. He had no idea I was a forensic accountant, and by 8 o'clock that night, he would be leaving my driveway in the back of a federal squad car. My name is Natalie, and at 33 years old, I was about to execute the most calculated financial takedown my greedy in-laws had ever seen. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through a family dinner while secretly plotting to destroy the toxic people sitting across from you. The smell of roasting turkey and thick tension filled the air of my spacious suburban home. I had woken up early to start prepping the $400 Wagyu beef roast I specially ordered for the holiday. But when I walked into the kitchen, Carol was already there. She was aggressively chopping onions and tossing my expensive organic produce into the trash to make room for her cheap canned goods. When I asked her what she was doing, she physically blocked me from the stove. A wife who works 80 hours a week crunching numbers at a desk is no real wife at all. Carol sneered, her eyes scanning me with pure disgust. You cannot even roast a simple bird. I am taking over. Brendan needs a proper home-cooked meal, not whatever overpriced garbage you ordered online. I stared at her, feeling my heart pound against my ribs. Carol, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I bought those ingredients. And more importantly, I bought this kitchen. I pay the mortgage on this house. You do not get to come in here and play matriarch on my dime. Brendan, my so-called tech startup CEO husband, whose company had not generated a single dollar in 18 months, let out a loud, mocking laugh from the hallway. Relax, Natalie, he said, walking in and grabbing an apple from the counter. Mom is just trying to help you out. You are terrible at domestic duties anyway. Let her do what she does best. You should be thanking her for saving Thanksgiving. The sheer audacity of his words made my blood run cold. He was wearing a designer watch I bought for his birthday, standing in a house my salary paid for, insulting me just to impress his manipulative mother. Carol smiled triumphantly, turning back to the stove. See, she hummed, pouring a heavy glug of my vintage wine into her sauce. My son knows the natural order of things. You might make the money dear, but a man is the head of the household, and the mother of the man commands the kitchen. Now be a good girl. Go sit in the living room and wait until the food is ready. I did not scream. I did not cry. Working in forensic accounting taught me that emotion is a liability, but data is an absolute weapon. I simply leaned against the granite counter, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and waited. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Right on cue, Brendan's cell phone started buzzing frantically in his pocket. He pulled it out, annoyed by the interruption, and answered. It was DeAndre, his brother-in-law, who had volunteered to make a quick run to the premium liquor store downtown to stock up for the party. Even from a few feet away, I could hear DeAndre shouting through the speaker. Brendan, what is going on, man? The cashier just declined your American Express Platinum card. I tried it 3 times. The line is huge and I look like an absolute fool out here. They are saying the account is locked. Brendan's face dropped. His smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer panic. He tapped the screen of his phone, completely ignoring his mother, who had stopped stirring her sauce. What do you mean, declined? Brendan stammered, his voice cracking slightly. That is impossible. Try the backup card. I do not have a backup card, DeAndre yelled back. Fix this right now. Brendan looked up, his eyes darting toward me in confusion and sudden terror. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my dark roast coffee. I looked him dead in the eye and offered a sweet, chilling smile. I canceled all the supplementary cards this morning, Brendan, I said softly, my voice echoing in the sudden silence of the kitchen. If your mother is the true head of this household, then she can pay for the liquor herself. Brendan stood completely frozen for a second, before his face turned a deep shade of crimson. He ended the call with DeAndre, and slammed his phone onto the granite island so hard I thought the screen would shatter. "What is wrong with you?" he screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "You are going to humiliate me in front of my own brother-in-law on Thanksgiving. Do you have any idea how bad this makes me look?" Carol gasped, dropping her wooden spoon into the sauce. She looked at me as if I had just committed a violent crime right in front of her. "Natalie, that is incredibly spiteful," she scolded, wiping her hands on the apron I had bought her last Christmas. "A good wife does not financially castrate her husband. Turn those cards back on right now before you ruin this family holiday completely." Before I could even respond to her ridiculous demand, the heavy front door swung open. Heavy footsteps echoed in the foyer, followed by the loud, dramatic voice of my sister-in-law, Ashley. "We are here," she announced, marching into the kitchen with her husband, DeAndre, right behind her. DeAndre, a tall and well-dressed man who always wore custom suits and claimed to run a high-end marketing consulting firm, looked absolutely furious. He was clutching his car keys so tightly his knuckles were pale. Both of their hands were completely empty. Not a bottle of wine, not a dessert, not even a cheap bouquet of flowers. They had showed up to my house expecting a free luxury feast that I was supposed to fund and prepare. DeAndre threw his keys onto the counter and glared at Brendan. "Man, you made me look like an absolute idiot down there." DeAndre snapped, shaking his head in disgust. The cashier actually laughed at me in front of a dozen people. I had to leave $200 worth of premium bourbon on the counter and walk out of the store empty-handed. What kind of CEO gets his platinum card declined at a local liquor store on a holiday? Ashley immediately turned her sharp glare toward me, completely ignoring her brother's obvious panic. She crossed her arms, her expensive diamond rings catching the light from the overhead chandelier. "I know exactly what happened," Ashley sneered, stepping closer to me to close the distance. "This is Natalie being her usual cheap, controlling self. You froze the accounts, did you not? You just love to ruin everything for everyone else." I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms to mirror her aggressive stance. "I simply removed authorized users from my personal credit line," I stated plainly, looking her directly in the eye. "If Brendan wants to buy premium bourbon for his guests, he can use his own money from his own bank account." Ashley let out a loud, obnoxious laugh. Her eyes rolled so far back, I thought she might lose her balance right there on my hardwood floor. "Oh my God, you are unbelievable," Ashley yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of the kitchen. "My brother is a successful tech CEO. He is building an empire from the ground up, and you are over here throwing a temper tantrum over a few bottles of liquor. You are so intimidated by his success that you have to play these petty little games to feel powerful. You should be supporting him, not embarrassing him in front of our entire family." Carol nodded vigorously in agreement, stepping out from behind the stove to stand shoulder to shoulder with her daughter. "Exactly," Carol chimed in, pointing her wooden spoon at me again. "Brendan works day and night on his company. The least you can do is manage the household finances without making a massive public scene. You are treating a visionary like a common teenager on a weekly allowance." Brendan puffed out his chest, clearly emboldened by his mother and sister rushing to his defense. "See, Natalie," Brendan said, pointing a finger at my face. "Everyone sees right through you. You are completely selfish. You do not understand how real business works. I have investors to entertain, networking events to fund, and a professional brand to maintain. I need liquidity, and you are choking my company just because you are jealous of my executive title." I let them talk. I let them build him up into this grand, successful entrepreneur. I watched DeAndre nod along with them, playing the role of the supportive fellow businessman. When they finally ran out of breath and the kitchen went quiet again, I set my coffee mug down on the counter. The ceramic clink sounded like a gavel dropping in a quiet courtroom. I looked at Ashley, then at Carol, and finally at my husband. I let out a soft, genuine laugh that wiped the smug expression right off Brendan's face. "Successful?" I asked, raising a single eyebrow at Ashley. "Do you even know what his company does, Ashley?" Because I do. I am a forensic accountant. I track money for a living. And I have tracked every single penny of his so-called empire. Brendan took a swift step back, his face suddenly turning pale white. Natalie, stop, he warned, his voice losing all of its previous bravado. But I was not going to stop. Not today. His company has not generated a single dime of revenue in 18 months, I said, my voice clear and unwavering, making sure every single word hit its mark. There are no investors. There is no product. There is only my salary. You are not defending a visionary CEO, Ashley. You are defending a grown man who plays office all day. That premium bourbon DeAndre tried to buy, that was not going on a corporate account. You are drinking my paycheck, Ashley, every single drop of it. Ashley's jaw dropped, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find a comeback. DeAndre shifted his weight, looking down at the marble floor, suddenly very interested in his expensive leather shoes. The silence in the kitchen was deafening, but it only lasted for a few seconds before Carol stepped in to shield her golden boy. Carol slammed her hand flat against the countertop, rattling the expensive spice jars I had arranged earlier. "How dare you speak about your husband's business that way?" Carol shouted, her face flushed with indignation. "Tech startups take years to become profitable. Amazon did not make a dime for nearly a decade. Brendan is a visionary building a legacy, and you are just a glorified calculator who cannot see the bigger picture. He is sacrificing his youth to build an empire for your future, and this is how you repay him. By counting pennies and embarrassing him in front of his own family." I looked at Carol, genuinely amazed by the level of delusion she possessed. "He is not a billionaire tech mogul, Carol," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level and completely void of emotion. "He plays golf on Tuesday afternoons and buys luxury watches on my dime. That is not a sacrifice. That is a permanent vacation funded by my labor." Carol waved her hand through the air, completely dismissing my reality. "You have always been small-minded, Natalie," Carol said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You do not understand what family means. You do not understand loyalty. But that is fine, because Brendan has a real family to support him through this crucial growth phase of his company. In fact, that brings me to the decision we made this morning." I narrowed my eyes at her. "Decision? What decision?" Carol stood up straighter, adjusting her apron as if she were donning a royal robe. "Since you clearly lack the emotional capacity to be a supportive wife, we are stepping in to ensure Brendan has the stability he needs," she announced, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "My husband and I are selling our small condo. We are moving into the east guest wing of this house permanently starting next month. We will take over the household management so Brendan can focus entirely on his investors without dealing with your constant financial nagging." Before I could even process the absolute insanity of that statement, Ashley jumped in, suddenly regaining her confidence. "And since DeAndre's consulting firm is currently transitioning into a new market phase, we are letting our downtown lease expire," Ashley added, crossing her arms and smiling smugly. "We will be taking the 2 guest bedrooms and the loft on the second floor. We are going to turn this place into a true family estate. We will all be here to support each other, like a real family does." I stared at the 4 of them. They had actually sat down without me and plotted to turn my 4,000-square-foot home into a free boarding house for their entire toxic lineage. DeAndre was transitioning, which was just corporate speak for failing to get clients. Carol and her husband wanted to live rent-free in luxury, and Brendan was going to let them do it so he could play the big shot provider with my money. I set my coffee mug down. The ceramic clink echoed sharply. "Absolutely not," I said, my voice cutting through the thick, greasy air of the kitchen like a razor blade. "Nobody is moving into the guest wing. Nobody is taking over the second floor. This is my house. I paid the down payment. I pay the mortgage. I pay the property taxes. This is not a commune for failing entrepreneurs and entitled relatives. You will all pack up your things after dinner and leave. And if any of you ever try to move a single cardboard box onto my property, I will have you arrested for trespassing." Ashley scoffed, rolling her eyes in disgust. "You are so dramatic," she muttered. Carol let out a sharp, mocking laugh. You cannot stop us, Natalie. This is my son's home too. He is the man of the house. I turned my gaze to Brendan, expecting him to cower or back down like he usually did when confronted with hard facts. But he did not. Instead, the panic he had shown earlier over the declined credit card was completely gone. A slow, chilling smirk spread across his face. He stepped away from the doorframe and walked confidently toward the kitchen island. He reached into the inside breast pocket of his tailored navy suit jacket, the expensive one I had bought him for our 3rd anniversary. He slowly pulled out a thick, legally bound document that had been folded in half. He tossed it onto the granite counter right next to my coffee mug. It landed with a heavy, deliberate thud that made the marble island vibrate slightly. You do not get a vote anymore, Natalie Brendan said, his voice dripping with absolute arrogance as he tapped his index finger against the thick paper. Read it and weep. I stared down at the thick stack of papers. The bold black lettering at the top of the first page was unmistakable. It was a home equity line of credit statement from a major national bank. My eyes scanned the summary box, and there it was printed in stark black ink. A loan balance of $300,000 borrowed directly against the equity of my house. And right below the balance listed as a co-borrower was Brendan's name. I picked up the statement, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. How exactly is your name on a loan tied to my property? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The kitchen suddenly felt completely devoid of air. Brendan crossed his arms, leaning back against the stainless steel refrigerator with a smug, satisfied grin. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. I am your husband, Natalie, he said proudly. What is yours is ours. I had my lawyer draft a quitclaim deed a few months ago. I slipped it into that stack of tax documents you signed in a hurry before your business trip to Chicago last September. You basically gifted me half the house without even reading the fine print. Once I was on the deed, taking out the equity loan was incredibly easy. The bank loved the neighborhood and the amount of equity you had already built up. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. He had tricked me. He had used my exhausting work schedule against me, sneaking a fraudulent property transfer into a pile of routine tax paperwork. He had effectively stolen $300,000 of my hard-earned equity to fund his non-existent company. He had mortgaged my future to pay for his delusions of grandeur. Carol let out a triumphant gasp, clapping her hands together as if Brendan had just announced he cured a major disease. Oh, Brendan, that is brilliant, she cheered, beaming at her son with absolute adoration. That is what a real man does. He takes charge of the family assets when his wife is too stubborn to see the big picture. You did what you had to do to protect your business. A good mother raises a smart son, and I am so proud of you for taking control of your own household. Ashley walked over and placed a hand on Brendan's shoulder, giving me a look of pure, unadulterated venom. Checkmate, Natalie. Ashley sneered, tossing her hair over her shoulder. You thought you could just kick us all out on the street because you hold the purse strings. You thought you could treat us like peasants just because you have a fancy corporate job. Well, guess what? You do not hold those purse strings anymore. My brother owns this house just as much as you do now. You are legally bound to that debt, and you are legally bound to us. Ashley stepped closer, her voice dropping to a nasty whisper. If you try to divorce him, you will have to sell the house and give him half anyway. Plus, you will be on the hook for half of that $300,000 loan. You are trapped. So you might as well go back into the living room, sit down, and let my mother finish cooking Thanksgiving dinner in our new family estate. They all stood there, a unified front of parasites waiting for me to break down. They expected tears. They expected screaming. They expected me to fall to my knees and realize I had been completely outsmarted by a man who spent his afternoons watching sports highlights while I worked myself to the bone. But I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not even flinch. Working in forensic accounting means I spend my life hunting down hidden assets, exposing corporate fraud, and destroying white-collar criminals. You cannot intimidate a woman who dismantles million-dollar embezzlement schemes before her morning coffee. My mind was already categorizing the penal codes Brendan had just violated. I carefully folded the statement and placed it back on the granite island. I looked at Brendan. He was practically vibrating with arrogance. Then I looked at Carol, who was already reaching for her wooden spoon to resume cooking her dreadful sauce. Finally, my eyes drifted past them and locked directly onto DeAndre. Up until this moment, DeAndre had been standing quietly near the doorway, enjoying the show. He had a smirk on his face, clearly amused by my apparent downfall. But as my eyes met his, I watched the confident posture drain completely out of his tall frame. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my steady gaze. He reached up and nervously adjusted the knot of his expensive silk tie. A fine layer of sweat had suddenly formed on his forehead. You see, Brendan thought he had pulled off the perfect heist. He thought taking out a $300,000 loan was the end of the game. But the thing about massive bank loans is that the money has to go somewhere. It leaves a permanent digital footprint. A trail of breadcrumbs that someone like me can follow in my sleep. I tilted my head, keeping my eyes locked on DeAndre. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as he realized I was staring right through him. "That is a very interesting story, Brendan," I said, my voice cutting through the thick tension in the room. "A $300,000 injection into your tech startup. That kind of capital should really help you get off the ground. There is just one tiny problem." "What problem?" Brendan demanded, his smug smile faltering just a fraction. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I set it on the counter and opened the lid. I did not look at Brendan. I kept staring right at his brother-in-law. "The problem," I said softly, "is that the money never went into your corporate business account. The problem," I said softly, "is that the money never went into your corporate business account." I turned my attention fully to the silver laptop sitting on the kitchen island. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in my encrypted password. The screen glowed to life, casting a pale blue light across my face. I did not do tears. I did not do emotional breakdowns. I did data, and data never lied. Brendan scoffed, shifting his weight uneasily against the refrigerator. "You are bluffing," he snapped, though his voice noticeably lacked its previous venom. "You do not have access to my corporate banking portals. My investors demand strict financial privacy. You cannot just hack into my company to see my ledgers." I did not even look up from my screen as I clicked open a highly secure directory. "I do not need access to your fake corporate accounts, Brendan," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "I am a senior forensic accountant. I track missing millions for multinational conglomerates. I do not ask for permission to see where money goes. I simply follow the digital footprints it leaves behind. When a major national bank approves a $300,000 home equity line of credit, they do not just hand you a briefcase full of unmarked bills. They execute a direct wire transfer. And wire transfers, no matter how hard you try to bounce them through dummy accounts, are highly regulated digital events. They are fully visible if you know exactly which clearinghouse database to query." I hit the enter key one last time, and a dense, complicated financial document expanded to fill the entire screen. It was a certified bank disbursement log, completely verified and undeniable. I turned the laptop around, slowly adjusting the screen so it was facing the four of them perfectly. Carol squinted, stepping away from the stove to peer at the glowing monitor. She was clearly unable to comprehend the complex rows of numbers, federal routing codes, and transaction timestamps. "What is all this gibberish?" she muttered, waving her wooden spoon defensively. "This proves nothing. You are just trying to confuse us with your corporate accounting tricks because you are angry that my son outsmarted you." I ignored her completely. Ashley, however, leaned in much closer. Her brow furrowed in deep confusion as she scanned the document. She might have been arrogant, but she was not completely illiterate when it came to reading a basic bank statement. Brendan, on the other hand, took a sudden step back. He looked as if the laptop itself were a venomous snake about to strike him. "Look right there at the highlighted row," I instructed, pointing a manicured finger at the bright yellow band glowing across the middle of the screen. The bank officially disbursed the loan funds on October 12th at exactly 9 in the morning. But the destination routing number does not match your tech startup, Brendan. It did not go into a business development fund. It did not go to a payroll provider. It went straight into a third-party commercial checking account. Ashley crossed her arms tightly across her chest, looking from the bright screen back to her brother. "What does that mean?" Ashley demanded, her tone sharpening with genuine suspicion. "Brendan, where exactly did you send $300,000 of loan money?" Brendan opened his mouth to speak, but he just stuttered, his eyes darting frantically around the kitchen looking for an excuse. I did not give him the chance to invent another lie. I kept my finger pressed firmly against the screen. The receiving account belongs to a corporate entity legally registered as Apex Marketing Solutions, LLC. I read aloud, letting the heavy name hang in the tense air for a long moment. I slowly raised my head and locked eyes with DeAndre. He was visibly trembling now. The confident, sharp-dressed consultant from 10 minutes ago was completely gone. The swagger had evaporated from his posture. He looked exactly like a man standing on the gallows watching the executioner pull the lever. He wiped a thick bead of sweat from his upper lip, refusing to meet his wife's gaze. Ashley frowned deeply, glancing over her shoulder at her husband. Apex Marketing Solutions. She repeated the realization, slowly washing over her sharp features. DeAndre, is that not your consulting firm? Why in the world is my brother sending your company that much money? DeAndre swallowed hard, opening his mouth, but absolutely no sound came out. The entire kitchen went completely still. Even the bubbling tomato sauce on the stove seemed to quiet down. I closed the laptop with a sharp, echoing snap that made Carol jump in surprise. "You did not put that $300,000 into your startup, Brendan," I said, my voice cutting through the dead silence of the room. "You wired it directly to DeAndre's LLC." The whole family froze. DeAndre broke the heavy silence first. He let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh that sounded completely unnatural in the quiet kitchen. "Now wait a second, Natalie," he stammered, raising both his hands defensively. "You are taking this entirely out of context. Brendan and I have a legitimate business relationship. That $300,000 was a secured business-to-business marketing contract. My agency was hired to completely rebrand his tech startup, build out a comprehensive digital footprint, and secure national media placements. It is standard corporate procedure for a company in its growth phase to allocate heavy funds toward aggressive marketing." Ashley snapped out of her frozen state the second she heard her husband defend himself. Her posture immediately went rigid, and the familiar fire of entitlement roared back into her eyes. She stepped right up to the marble island, practically leaning over my laptop. "You are so predictable!" Natalie Ashley screamed, her voice shrill and echoing loudly off the custom cabinets. "You cannot stand the fact that my husband is a successful Black entrepreneur. You have always looked down on him. The second you see a man of color making big moves and keeping wealth within the family, you immediately try to criminalize it. You are trying to ruin a Black-owned business just because you are bitter, controlling, and racist." I did not flinch at her wild accusation. When you spend your entire career investigating corporate embezzlement, you get called every name in the book by guilty people trying to deflect blame. I kept my posture relaxed, resting my hands lightly on the edge of the granite counter. "Racist," I repeated, keeping my tone deadly calm. "Ashley, your husband does not own a marketing agency. He owns a registered shell company that operates out of a virtual post office box at a strip mall. And I am not criminalizing his business. I am simply reading his invoices." I reached out and tapped the spacebar on my laptop. A new document popped up on the screen, overlaying the bank wire logs. It was a digital copy of the exact contract DeAndre was claiming as legitimate. "Let us review this comprehensive digital footprint he built," I said, pointing to the first line item on the screen. "DeAndre, you invoiced Brendan $50,000 for search engine optimization on a website domain that has not even been registered yet. How exactly do you optimize a website that does not exist on the internet?" DeAndre swallowed hard again. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his temple. "Well, the preparatory research takes time," he mumbled, looking frantically toward Brendan for help. Brendan refused to make eye contact with him, staring rigidly at the floor. I tapped the down arrow, scrolling to the next fraudulent line item. Here is another fascinating charge, I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the silent kitchen. You billed him $85,000 for a national billboard campaign. Yet when I ran a cross-reference on all major outdoor advertising vendors in the tri-state area, not a single one had a contract registered to Apex Marketing Solutions. Not one. You also charged $20,000 for catered networking events that never happened. Ashley crossed her arms, her face flushing with a mix of anger and sudden uncertainty. She looked at DeAndre, waiting for him to shut me down with a brilliant corporate explanation. But DeAndre had absolutely nothing to say. He just stood there, tugging nervously at his expensive silk tie, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. Carol tried to intervene, clearly desperate to regain control of her precious Thanksgiving morning. This is none of your business, Natalie. Carol snapped, pointing her wooden spoon at me like a weapon. Men handle business their own way. If Brendan trusted DeAndre with that money, then it was a family investment. You have no right to snoop through their private documents and act like some kind of detective in your own home. It became my business the exact second Brendan forged my signature to steal equity from my house. I fired back, my eyes locking onto Carol until she nervously looked away. And DeAndre did not invest this money into any marketing campaigns. He did not build a brand. He took a 10% cut for laundering the funds, and he sent the remaining $270,000 right back out the door. Ashley's eyes widened in sheer panic. What do you mean he sent it back out? She demanded, her voice trembling as she looked back and forth between me and her husband. DeAndre, where did that money go? DeAndre closed his eyes, letting out a long, defeated breath. He knew the game was over. I will show you exactly where it went, I said. I pressed one final key on my laptop. The fake invoices disappeared, replaced by a scan of a highly detailed, legally binding real estate contract. It was not a business lease. It was a luxury apartment lease downtown. Ashley stared at the glowing screen of my laptop, her eyes frantically tracing the bold print at the top of the PDF document. The address listed on the lease agreement was located in the most expensive high-rise building in the city's financial district. For a few seconds, the gears in her head visibly turned as she processed what she was looking at. Then, the realization hit her like a freight train, and she absolutely lost her mind. A luxury apartment. Ashley shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch so high it practically vibrated the crystal wine glasses. Are you out of your mind, DeAndre? You took $300,000 of my brother's business capital to rent a secret bachelor pad downtown. DeAndre threw his hands up, stumbling backward until his back hit the stainless steel refrigerator. Baby, wait! He pleaded, his eyes wide with sheer terror. You have got it all wrong. It is not what it looks like. Let me explain the strategy. Do not you dare tell me to wait, Ashley screamed, marching right up to her husband and shoving him hard in the chest. You told me your company was transitioning. You told me we had to move into my mother's house because cash flow was tight, and this whole time you were siphoning money to rent a luxury penthouse. Who is she, DeAndre? Who are you hiding in that apartment? I want a name right now. Carol let out a loud gasp and immediately jumped into the fray. I knew it, Carol yelled, pointing a trembling finger at her son-in-law. I always knew you were a fraud. You manipulated my brilliant son. You convinced Brendan to trust you with his startup capital, and you embezzled it to fund your filthy affairs. You are a thief. Mom, stop, Brendan shouted, his voice cracking, as he stepped forward, desperately trying to get between his mother and DeAndre. Just everyone calm down for a second. We can discuss this in the living room. Natalie is just trying to manipulate us and turn us against each other. She is distracting us. Do not tell me to calm down, Ashley roared, whipping her head around to glare at her brother. Your so-called business partner is cheating on me with your money. I am calling my lawyer right now. DeAndre, give me your phone. I want to see every single text message you have sent for the last 6 months. Open it right now. DeAndre clutched his pockets, shaking his head frantically. Ashley, I swear to you on my life I am not cheating on you, he begged, his voice rising in panic. I do not have a woman downtown. The apartment is not for me. Brendan, tell them. Tell your sister the truth before she destroys our marriage. Brendan froze. His face went completely pale, and he looked at the floor, refusing to say a single word. He was perfectly willing to let his brother-in-law take the fall for his massive financial crimes. He just stood there, avoiding his sister's furious gaze. Oh, so now you are going to blame my brother? Ashley laughed bitterly. You are pathetic, DeAndre. You steal his money, you cheat on your wife, and then you try to drag him down with you. The kitchen devolved into absolute chaos. Carol was screaming about calling the police to have DeAndre arrested for corporate embezzlement. Ashley was aggressively demanding the passcode to DeAndre's phone, threatening to throw his custom suits out onto the front lawn. Brendan was frantically waving his hands, trying to quiet both of them down before the neighbors called the cops, while DeAndre shouted back, begging anyone to listen to his side of the story. It was a complete meltdown. I stood perfectly still, leaning casually against the marble island, watching the entire toxic family tear themselves apart. It was a beautiful, poetic sight. They had walked into my kitchen ready to kick me out and claim my home as their own. Now they were ready to destroy each other over the very money they had stolen from me. I let them scream and shove each other for another full minute. I let the paranoia and betrayal completely saturate the room. When I decided I had seen enough of their pathetic circus, I reached out and slammed my palm flat against the granite countertop. The loud, sharp crack echoed like a gunshot, instantly silencing the room. All four of them froze, turning their heads to look at me, their chests heaving from the screaming match. I locked eyes with my furious sister-in-law. DeAndre is not cheating Ashley. I said, my voice eerily calm and commanding in the sudden quiet. He just acted as the money mule for Brendan. The apartment is leased in Brendan's name. Brendan stumbled backward, shaking his head violently, as the heavy silence pressed down on him. That is a corporate lease. He blurted out, his voice cracking under the weight of his own rising panic. He looked frantically at his mother, then at Ashley, his eyes wide and desperate as he scrambled to regain their trust. It is an executive workspace. He continued, speaking so fast his words began to blur together in a desperate stream of excuses. I needed a private office downtown to host angel investors and venture capitalists. You cannot build a tech empire from a suburban guest bedroom. The building has a private boardroom, high-speed fiber optics, and dedicated concierge services. It is strictly for business development and hosting important clients. Ashley narrowed her eyes, still breathing heavily from her screaming match with DeAndre. An executive workspace, she repeated, sounding like she desperately wanted to believe him so her own marriage could be saved. So DeAndre just helped you secure a commercial office. Yes, exactly. Brendan practically shouted, pointing a shaky finger at DeAndre as if he were his ultimate savior. DeAndre handled the commercial real estate acquisition as part of the marketing rollout. It is completely standard procedure for a new startup. Natalie is just twisting the paperwork to make it look like something malicious because she hates seeing me succeed. She wants to ruin this family. I watched him spin his pathetic web of lies. It was almost sad how easily the words flowed out of his mouth. He was so accustomed to lying to my face that he actually believed he could talk his way out of federal bank fraud and blatant infidelity in a single breath. He thought he could just throw around business buzzwords and I would simply back down. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice or call him a liar. I simply reached back out to my laptop keyboard. If it is a corporate workspace to host your venture capitalists, I said, my tone perfectly conversational and relaxed, then I suppose you will not mind showing everyone the kind of business development you have been conducting there. I clicked a secure folder on my desktop labeled Evidence. You see, when you use a marital bank account to pay the monthly internet bill for your secret downtown apartment, it makes it incredibly easy for a forensic accountant to access the connected smart home devices on that network. Devices like the high-definition video doorbell installed right outside your front door. Brendan lunged forward, his face draining of all color, his eyes wide with absolute horror. "No! Shut it down!" he yelled, reaching aggressively across the marble island to grab the laptop away from me. I slid the computer smoothly out of his reach and hit the playback button. I had already connected my laptop to the large smart television mounted on the kitchen wall via Bluetooth. The massive screen flashed to life, instantly filling the room with crystal-clear video footage. The entire family turned in unison to stare at the screen. The digital timestamp on the bottom corner indicated it was recorded just 3 nights ago, precisely when I was stuck at my office auditing a late-night corporate merger. The camera angle showed the luxurious, warmly lit hallway of the downtown apartment building. The elevator doors opened in the background, and Brendan walked into the frame. He was not wearing his tailored business suit. He was wearing casual clothes, laughing loudly, and holding a bottle of expensive champagne in one hand. But he was certainly not alone. He was carrying a young, petite blonde woman over the threshold in his arms. She looked like she was barely out of college, maybe 22 years old at most. She had her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, giggling uncontrollably as she kicked her long legs in the air. She was wearing a tiny black dress and designer heels that were definitely paid for by my stolen equity. Her expensive leather handbag dangled from her wrist, swinging back and forth as she laughed. "Come on, Mr. CEO," the girl cooed on the video, her voice echoing clearly and crisply through the television speakers. "Let me see the penthouse you promised me." Brendan leaned in and kissed her passionately, right in front of the camera lens, his hands roaming all over her before he kicked the apartment door shut behind them. The video ended, leaving a frozen high-resolution image of my husband kissing a woman a decade younger than me. The kitchen descended into a suffocating dead silence. The absolute, undeniable proof of his betrayal was displayed on a 65-inch screen for his entire family to witness. Ashley covered her mouth with both hands, stumbling back against the counter. "Oh my God!" she whispered, her eyes wide with utter shock. DeAndre looked at the ceiling, letting out a long, heavy sigh of relief that he was finally off the hook for the cheating allegations. Brendan stood frozen in the center of the room. His mouth hung open, but no words came out. The tech CEO, the visionary, the man of the house, was completely exposed as nothing more than a lying, cheating thief. He looked at me, waiting for me to scream, to cry, or to throw something at him. But I just stood there, completely unbothered, taking another sip of my coffee. I waited for the family to turn on him. I waited for them to realize they had been defending a monster who stole from his wife to fund a mistress. But I had severely underestimated the terrifying depths of their toxic delusions. Carol stepped right into the middle of the kitchen, physically positioning herself between me and her son. She puffed out her chest completely, ignoring the blatant evidence of fraud and infidelity displayed right behind her. She did not look angry at Brendan. She did not look ashamed. She looked furious at me. "Well, what did you expect, Natalie?" Carol shouted, her voice echoing harshly off the high ceilings. The sheer audacity of her words hit the room like a physical blow. She pointed an accusatory finger right at my chest. "If you gave him children instead of working 70 hours a week, he would not have to look elsewhere. He is a man." The sheer absurdity of Carol's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I stared at her, waiting for a punchline that never came. She was entirely serious. She had just watched high-definition footage of her son carrying a young woman into a luxury apartment funded by stolen money, and her immediate reaction was to blame my work schedule. Ashley stepped forward, completely abandoning her previous outrage over the stolen money. She stood next to her mother, crossing her arms and looking at me with absolute disdain. "Mom is right, Natalie," Ashley said, her voice dripping with venom. "You are practically a roommate to him. You pay the bills, but you do not provide a real home. Brendan is a high-value man with a stressful career. He needs an outlet. If you were a better wife, he would not have needed to find affection outside of this marriage." I looked at DeAndre, expecting him to at least show a shred of decency, but he simply looked away, entirely relieved that the crosshairs were no longer on his fraudulent business. The entire family had instantly formed a united front. They did not care about the federal bank fraud. They did not care about the blatant lies. They only cared about protecting their golden boy and securing their own comfortable spots in my home. Seeing his mother and sister aggressively defend his infidelity, Brendan seemed to find his courage again. The pale, terrified look melted off his face, replaced by that familiar, infuriating smirk. He straightened his posture, adjusted the cuffs of his expensive tailored shirt, and took a deliberate step toward me. He actually believed he had won. "You see, Natalie," Brendan said, his voice returning to that arrogant, condescending tone. "This is why you should never try to play hardball with my family. We stick together. We understand how the real world works. You can sit there and judge me all you want, but at the end of the day, I hold all the legal cards. You have two choices right now, and I strongly suggest you think very carefully before you speak." He leaned against the granite island, projecting complete dominance. "Choice 1, you accept this situation. You reinstate my credit cards, you stop hacking into my private life, and you accept that I have certain needs as a rising executive. You let my family move in as planned, and we continue this marriage. I will even forgive you for embarrassing me today in front of everyone." I let out a soft, long breath, genuinely amazed by his sociopathic confidence. "And what exactly is choice 2, Brendan?" I asked evenly, keeping my face completely blank. Ashley let out a sharp, mocking laugh before he could even answer. "Choice 2 is, we destroy you in court," she snapped, pointing her manicured finger at my face. "Brendan is legally on the deed to this house. He is a co-borrower on the $300,000 equity line. If you try to divorce him, you will be trapped in brutal litigation for the next 5 years." Brendan nodded slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "My sister is absolutely right, Natalie. If you file for divorce, I will demand half of everything. I will demand spousal support because I am a struggling startup founder and you are a wealthy corporate accountant. I will force a judge to order the sale of this entire estate, and I will take 50% of the remaining equity. By the time my lawyers are done draining your bank accounts with endless motions and delays, you will be living in a tiny studio apartment while I walk away with a massive cash settlement." Carol smiled proudly at her son, patting him on the back. "You cannot win this, dear Carol," added her tone mocking and sweet. "You are a smart girl when it comes to counting numbers on your spreadsheets, but you do not understand family law. A wife cannot just kick her legal husband out onto the street. You are bound to him. You are bound to his debts. So I suggest you go to the living room, pour yourself a glass of wine, and calm down. We have a Thanksgiving turkey to finish cooking." They all stood there, an impenetrable wall of delusional entitlement waiting for me to surrender. They thought the threat of a messy divorce and a forced real estate sale would break my spirit. They thought tying up my assets in court was the ultimate checkmate. I reached over and slowly closed my laptop, the sharp click echoing loudly in the completely quiet kitchen. I looked directly into my husband's smug eyes. "You simply cannot take half of a house I do not own anymore," I said quietly. Brendan stared at me, his eyes darting back and forth as if he were trying to decipher a complex riddle. He let out a loud, forced laugh, snatching the thick home equity line of credit statement off the granite counter and waving it frantically in the air. "What in the world are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure. "I am holding the absolute proof right here in my hand. My name is on the deed. My name is on the loan. You cannot just erase a legally binding document. The bank processed it. The county recorded it. We own this house together, Natalie. You are not kicking anyone out." Ashley quickly backed him up, sneering at me with renewed confidence. "She is just bluffing, Brendan," she declared, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "She is trying to scare you into walking away so she does not have to pay you alimony or split the assets. It is a desperate, pathetic tactic. Mom is right. You have the upper hand here. Do not let her intimidate you." Carol scoffed, returning her attention to the stove. "Let her talk her nonsense," Carol muttered, stirring the heavy sauce aggressively. She is just having a childish temper tantrum because she finally realizes she is not in control of this family anymore. I did not raise my voice to compete with their sheer ignorance. I simply leaned forward, resting both of my hands flat on the cold marble island. A recorded document is only legally binding if the signatures on it are authentic, Brendan. I said, my voice cutting cleanly through their arrogant chatter. Brendan froze, the bank statement still gripped tightly in his raised hand. "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked defensively, his eyes narrowing. "It means I never signed a quitclaim deed transferring half of my property to you," I explained, enunciating every single syllable so there could be no misunderstanding. "You claimed you slipped it into a stack of tax documents right before my business trip to Chicago last September. But you did not. Because I review every single page I sign, especially tax documents. You forged my signature, Brendan, and it is a crime." He rolled his eyes, feigning exasperation, though I could see the slight tremor in his fingers. "Oh, please," he scoffed loudly. "Good luck proving that in a court of law. It has a certified notary stamp on it. The bank accepted it without a single question. You cannot just claim forgery because you regret giving me equity to build my company. You really are entirely clueless about how the modern financial system works," I replied, shaking my head in disbelief. "You thought you could just fake my signature, pay a shady notary $50 to stamp it, and walk away with $500,000 in real estate. But you forgot one crucial detail about my career. As a senior forensic accountant, my personal financial profiles are continuously monitored by the highest tiers of federal banking security. The very moment a fraudulent quitclaim deed was filed against my primary residence, an automated alert was generated and sent directly to my firm fraud department. They flagged the notary you used immediately. He lost his license for fraud." The color completely drained from Brendan's face. The thick statement in his hand began to tremble noticeably. DeAndre, who was trying to fade into the background, suddenly looked terrified all over again. "Federal banking security." Brendan whispered, the reality of his situation finally piercing his thick skull. "Yes, Brendan," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step around the kitchen island toward him. "Federal. Because when you use a forged document to secure a $300,000 line of credit from a federally insured institution, you are not committing a simple marital dispute. You are committing felony bank fraud." Ashley took a step back, her eyes wide with sudden terror. "Wait," she stammered, looking frantically at her brother. "Brendan, did you actually forge her signature on that document?" He did not even bother to answer her. He was staring at me, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. "But the loan went through," he whispered, speaking more to himself than to me. "The bank gave me the money. They would not have given me the money if they knew the document was fake. They gave you the money because I personally authorized them to release it," I stated, dropping the final devastating piece of the puzzle. The entire kitchen went dead silent. "You did what?" Brendan gasped, his eyes wide. "I discovered your forged deed exactly 6 weeks ago," I revealed, my voice echoing coldly in the room. "I have been setting a trap for you ever since, and you walked right into it." Brendan stumbled back until he hit the stainless steel refrigerator behind him. He shook his head repeatedly, trying to reject the absolute reality of my words. "A trap," he stammered, his voice dropping an octave in sheer panic. "What trap?" "The deed was recorded with the county clerk. I saw the official stamp with my own 2 eyes. You cannot just undo a recorded public document because you feel like it. It takes a judge and a massive trial to overturn a real estate transfer." I smiled, a genuine cold smile that made him shrink even further back. "It takes a trial if the notary is a licensed state official," I corrected him, taking a step closer to the island. "But the guy you hired from that sketchy strip mall to stamp my forged signature was a complete amateur. He lost his notary commission 2 years ago for processing fake auto loan documents. You were so desperate to steal my equity that you did not even run a basic background check on your co-conspirator. You paid a convicted fraudster $50 to stamp a federal document." Ashley gasped loudly, clutching the edge of the kitchen island. "Are you serious?" she whispered, glaring at her brother in disbelief. "You used a disgraced criminal to steal her house." Brendan ignored her, his eyes locked on me in absolute horror. I continued my explanation, enjoying every single second of his unraveling. The moment my firm fraud department flagged the unlicensed notary stamp, I bypassed the local courts entirely. I took the file straight to a federal judge who handles high-level real estate fraud cases for my corporate clients. I did not even have to hire a private attorney. When a deed is stamped by an unlicensed civilian, it is not considered a disputed contract that needs to be argued in front of a jury. It is considered legally void from its very inception. It took my legal team exactly 48 hours to file an emergency quiet title action and have your name completely scrubbed from the county records. He was breathing heavily now, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. "You erased me from the deed," he asked, his voice trembling as the truth finally crushed his ego. "You erased yourself the moment you committed a felony," I replied sharply. "You have not been a legal owner of this property for over a month. And since the home equity line of credit was issued based on a fraudulent voided deed, the National Bank immediately classified the $300,000 as an unsecured fraudulent disbursement. They severed the lien against the property. That means the massive debt is entirely yours, Brendan. Not a single penny is attached to this house, and I am completely free and clear of your financial crimes." Carol, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally found her voice. She stepped forward, her face flushed with a mix of fierce anger and sheer panic. "Now you listen here, Natalie," she commanded, though her voice lacked its usual intimidating bite. "You might have played your little legal tricks to get his name off the paper, but this is still his marital residence. We are his family. You cannot just throw a man and his family out onto the street on Thanksgiving Day. There are tenant rights. There are eviction moratoriums. We have bags packed and we are staying right here in the guest wing until this is properly sorted out in a divorce court." Ashley nodded frantically, clinging to her mother's desperate logic. "Exactly," Ashley chimed in, pointing a shaky finger at me. "You are still legally married to him. You cannot evict your own husband without a massive legal battle. We will drag this out for months. We are not leaving this kitchen." I looked at the two women, absolutely fascinated by their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They were still trying to play chess while the entire board was already on fire. I reached out and gently closed my laptop, the sharp click echoing in the tense silence. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Carol," I said, maintaining perfect eye contact with my mother-in-law. "I cannot legally evict my own husband without a lengthy court battle. Evicting a spouse from a primary marital residence is a nightmare process that takes at least 6 months of brutal litigation." I knew that the moment I found out about the forged deed and his secret downtown apartment. Brendan let out a sudden ragged breath of relief, thinking he had finally found a loophole. "See," he practically shouted, his face brightening with a desperate, pathetic hope. "You admit it. You cannot kick me out today. You cannot kick my family out." "I cannot kick you out," I agreed smoothly, "but the new owners certainly can." Brendan's face instantly froze. "What new owners?" he asked, the panic rushing right back into his voice. I took a slow sip of my coffee before delivering the final fatal blow. Once I quietly reverted the deed back to my name alone, I did not just keep the house. I immediately sold it in an off-market all-cash transaction to an aggressive corporate real estate firm owned by the senior partners at my accounting agency. Brendan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He gripped the edge of the granite island, his knuckles turning completely white as his brain desperately tried to process the magnitude of his failure. "You sold the house." He choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "You sold the house out from under me." "I sold my house, Brendan," I corrected him, setting my coffee mug down. "And I did it entirely legally. Since your forged deed was voided from the moment it was stamped, I was the sole owner of this property. I was free to liquidate my asset whenever I pleased. The funds from the sale are already sitting safely in a private offshore trust that you cannot touch in a divorce. Ashley let out a horrified gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. Carol stumbled back, leaning heavily against the stove, her arrogant posture completely collapsing. But Brendan, ever the delusional narcissist, suddenly let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. He threw his hands up in the air, trying to reclaim some shred of his shattered dignity. "You know what?" Fine, Brendan shouted, his face red with a manic, desperate energy. "Sell the house. Take the equity. I do not care. I still won. The bank already disbursed the $300,000. I have the cash. My startup is funded. My apartment is paid for. You can play your little real estate games all you want, Natalie, but I got exactly what I needed out of this marriage." He actually thought he was untouchable. He thought the money was his to keep. "You really are the dumbest man I have ever met," I said, shaking my head in genuine pity. "You do not have that cash, Brendan. The bank has that cash. And they want it back." When the bank realized the loan was secured by a fraudulent document, they did not just cancel the lien on the house. They immediately flagged the $300,000 disbursement as a stolen asset. Brendan crossed his arms, still trying to project confidence. "So what?" he sneered. "Let them send me to collections. Let them try to sue me in civil court. By the time they get a judgment, my company will be making millions." I leaned across the marble island, lowering my voice to a deadly serious pitch. "They are not going to sue you in civil court, Brendan. You did not default on a credit card. You forged a federal lending document. And then you had the bank wire $300,000 of stolen funds from their national clearinghouse in Delaware directly into a commercial account in this state. Do you know what happens when you move fraudulently obtained funds across state lines?" The kitchen went entirely silent. Brendan swallowed hard, his arrogant smirk finally melting off his face for good. "It instantly becomes federal wire fraud," I stated clearly, letting the words hang in the air like an executioner axe. "And the FBI does not send you to collections, Brendan. They send you to federal prison." The moment I said the word federal, a sudden violent shift occurred on the other side of the kitchen. DeAndre, who had been completely paralyzed with fear since I exposed his fake marketing agency, suddenly snapped. His eyes widened to the size of saucers. He looked down at his own hands, then slowly looked up at Brendan. "Wait," DeAndre gasped, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "You wired the money directly into my business account. The federal authorities think my LLC received stolen funds." "You did receive stolen funds, DeAndre," I clarified, turning my attention to my terrified brother-in-law. "You accepted $300,000 of fraudulently obtained bank money. You took a $30,000 cut for yourself. And then you helped him launder the rest of it to pay for his secret luxury apartment. In the eyes of the federal government, you are not just an innocent bystander. You are a willing accessory to money laundering and wire fraud." DeAndre's face contorted into an expression of pure, unadulterated rage. He realized instantly that his own brother-in-law had not just used his company. Brendan had effectively handed him a federal prison sentence just to fund his cheating lifestyle. Ashley screamed as DeAndre suddenly lunged forward. He shoved past the heavy oak chairs, his expensive leather shoes, slipping slightly on the hardwood floor as he charged directly at Brendan. "You set me up," DeAndre roared, grabbing Brendan by the collar of his tailored shirt and slamming him hard against the stainless steel refrigerator. The impact rattled the entire kitchen. "I have a clean record. I have a real life. You dragged me into a felony for your side piece. I will end you." DeAndre had Brendan pinned so hard against the stainless steel refrigerator that the appliance groaned loudly under their combined weight. Brendan gasped for air, his hands scrambling uselessly at DeAndre's iron grip on his expensive tailored collar. He tried to speak, to offer some pathetic excuse to save his own skin, but the sheer terror in his eyes finally mirrored the absolute gravity of his crimes. DeAndre was not playing around. He was a man who had just realized his entire future. His freedom and his professional reputation had been pawned off by his own brother-in-law. Ashley let out a piercing shriek and threw herself between the two men, desperately grabbing at her husband's arms. DeAndre let him go. She sobbed, her manicured nails digging frantically into his suit jacket. "You are going to make it worse. Please stop hurting him." DeAndre shoved Brendan away with a sickening thud, stepping back and running his hands over his face in pure agony. "Make it worse," he shouted, his voice echoing harshly off the high kitchen ceilings. "Ashley, I am an accessory to federal wire fraud. Do you understand what that actually means? The federal government has a 98% conviction rate for these types of financial crimes. I am going to federal prison because your brother wanted to play sugar daddy to a 22-year-old girl downtown." Ashley stood frozen in the center of the kitchen. The reality of those words finally shattered her delusional superiority complex. The designer bags, the luxury vacations, the smug entitlement she carried with her just 20 minutes ago completely evaporated into thin air. She slowly turned away from her gasping brother and looked directly at me. Her face was streaked with running mascara, her eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate pleading that I had never seen from her before. She stumbled toward the marble island, gripping the cold stone as if it were the only thing keeping her standing upright. "Natalie, please," Ashley begged, her voice cracking heavily as she leaned across the counter toward me. "You have to fix this. You know DeAndre had no idea the money was actually stolen from your equity. He just thought he was doing a legitimate business deal with Brendan. He is a good man. He is your family. You cannot let them take him away from me. You have to tell the bank he is completely innocent." I looked down at her hands gripping the counter, then slowly met her tear-filled eyes. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no warmth. I only felt the cold, hard justice of accountability settling into the room. "My family." I repeated, testing the word on my tongue as if it were a foreign language. "That is incredibly fascinating, Ashley. Because 20 minutes ago, when you thought I was just a bitter wife freezing credit cards, you stood right there and called me a cheap, controlling racist. You screamed that I was actively trying to destroy a successful Black-owned business out of pure spite and jealousy." Ashley flinched heavily as if I had physically struck her across the face. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks and dripping onto the floor. "I did not mean it," she cried out desperately. "I was just angry. I did not know the truth about the apartment or the loan. You knew exactly who you were defending." I fired back, my voice rising just enough to command the absolute attention of the entire room. "You were perfectly happy to reap the rewards when you thought Brendan had simply outsmarted me with that fake deed. You were ready to move into my second floor rent-free. You were ready to let me pay off a $300,000 debt while you lived in luxury on my dime. You did not care about the truth until the truth suddenly carried a federal prison sentence for your husband. I cannot raise a family alone." Ashley wailed, completely breaking down in front of me, sobbing uncontrollably. "Just call the bank. Tell them you gave Brendan permission to borrow the money. Tell them it was a huge misunderstanding between spouses. We will pay you back every single penny. Just leave DeAndre out of it." I shook my head, marveling at her complete lack of basic financial literacy. "You still do not understand, Ashley. I do not have a magical red phone to call off the federal government. I did not press charges. The bank triggered an automated federal investigation the second they verified the fraudulent notary stamp. It is completely out of my hands now. DeAndre is going to have to explain his fake invoices to a federal judge." Before Ashley could scream again, Carol stepped forward. She physically pushed her crying daughter aside, her face hardened into a mask of pure, stubborn authority. She still refused to accept that her reign of terror over me had come to an absolute end. She puffed out her chest, adjusting her apron. "Enough of this nonsense," Carol barked, pointing her wooden spoon directly at my face, as if she were disciplining a disobedient child. "You are going to open that laptop right now, Natalie. You are going to find the phone number for the head of that bank, and you are going to call them. You will tell them this is a private marital dispute that got totally out of hand. You will fix this massive mess your stubbornness created, and you will do it before my Thanksgiving dinner gets cold." I stared at my mother-in-law, an arrogant woman who had spent years treating me like a maid in my own home. I picked up my ceramic coffee mug, taking my time as I let her ridiculous demands settle into the dead silent air of the room. I set the mug down and offered her a bright, chilling smile. "Or what, Carol?" I asked softly. "You will kick me out of my own kitchen." Carol stood frozen, her wooden spoon still pointing awkwardly in my direction. Her mouth opened, but for the first time in the entire 7 years I had known her, she had absolutely nothing to say. She looked around my luxurious custom kitchen, finally realizing that she had zero authority in a house I had just legally sold from, right under her feet. She slowly lowered her arm, the fight completely draining out of her rigid posture. She took a step back, bumping into the stove, suddenly looking like a very small, very tired old woman. Before Carol could even attempt to muster another pathetic threat, a sharp, repetitive buzzing sound sliced through the heavy silence of the room. It was Brendan's cell phone. The device was sitting face up on the granite island, right where he had slammed it down earlier. The screen illuminated brightly, vibrating so violently against the hard stone that it sounded like a tiny jackhammer. Brendan flinched, pulling his eyes away from DeAndre's furious glare to look at the screen. Even from a few feet away, I could easily read the caller ID. It was a name saved with a series of red heart emojis. Brendan swallowed hard, his face turning an even paler shade of white. He reached out with a trembling hand and grabbed the phone, frantically pressing the button to silence the incoming call. But the moment he silenced it, a rapid-fire series of text messages began flooding his lock screen. Ping, ping, ping. The notification chimes echoed relentlessly through the quiet kitchen. He unlocked his phone, his eyes darting back and forth as he read the messages. With every passing second, his shoulders slumped further. His jaw dropped. The last remaining shred of his arrogant tech CEO facade crumbled completely into dust. He looked like a man who had just been told his parachute failed to deploy. "Is there a problem in paradise, Brendan?" I asked, leaning casually against the counter. He snapped his head up to look at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of betrayal and absolute horror. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice cracking horribly. "What did you send her?" Ashley and Carol exchanged confused glances momentarily, forgetting their own impending doom to witness Brendan's complete emotional breakdown. "Who is texting you?" Ashley demanded, stepping closer to her brother. I answered for him. "It is his 22-year-old luxury apartment tenant," I said smoothly. "And to answer your question, Brendan, I sent her a very comprehensive email about 30 minutes ago. You see, when a man is lying to his wife about his finances, he is almost certainly lying to his mistress about them too. I figured she deserved to know exactly who she was dating. You contacted her." Brendan gasped, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned entirely white. "I am a forensic accountant," I reminded him, offering a sweet, merciless smile. "Tracking down the contact information of a girl who gets her internet bill paid by my stolen equity is incredibly easy. I sent her a neatly organized PDF portfolio. I included the true balance of your non-existent corporate accounts. I included the federal voiding of your fraudulent quitclaim deed. And most importantly, I included a detailed explanation of the federal wire fraud charges you are about to face." Brendan stared at me, completely unable to process the absolute surgical precision of my revenge. I thought she might want to know that her wealthy, successful startup founder is actually a broke, unemployed fraudster who is about to be indicted by the federal government. I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the silent room. "Young girls looking for a luxury lifestyle generally do not want to stick around for federal prison sentences and asset seizures. I assume those text messages are her packing her designer bags and leaving the keys on the counter." "No," Brendan choked out, staring down at his phone screen again. "No, she loves me. We had a connection." He frantically tapped the screen, trying to call her back. The phone did not even ring. It went straight to a disconnected carrier tone. She had already blocked his number. He let out a pathetic, guttural sob, dropping the phone back onto the granite island. It was over. Every single lie he had built his entire identity around had been systematically destroyed in less than an hour. He had no house. He had no company. He had no stolen money. He had no wife, and now he did not even have the mistress he had risked everything for. He was entirely broke and entirely alone. Carol rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around his trembling shoulders. "Oh, my poor baby," she cooed, glaring at me with pure hatred. "You are a monster, Natalie. You are an absolute monster." I just took another sip of my coffee, feeling nothing but a profound, satisfying sense of peace. Just as Brendan buried his face in his hands to cry, a sudden massive sound shattered the tense atmosphere. It was a loud, aggressive pounding echoing from the heavy oak front door. The entire house seemed to vibrate from the sheer force of the blows. It was not a polite knock from a neighbor. It was the heavy, authoritative strike of someone demanding immediate entry. The pounding echoed through the grand foyer a second time, striking the heavy oak door with such force that the frosted glass side panels rattled. The sudden violent noise shattered the remaining tension in the kitchen. DeAndre immediately let go of the refrigerator handle, stepping back as if the stainless steel appliance had physically burned him. Ashley wiped her tear-streaked face, letting out a sharp gasp. Even Carol stopped hovering over her weeping son. Brendan slowly lifted his face from his hands. His eyes were bloodshot and his entire body was trembling violently as he pushed himself away from the kitchen island. He stumbled out of the kitchen, his leather shoes dragging heavily against the hardwood floor as he made his way toward the front window. The sheer curtain was drawn tight to keep out the chilly draft, but he reached out with a shaking hand and pulled the fabric just a fraction of an inch to the side. The moment he peered through the narrow gap, whatever tiny shred of hope he had left completely vanished into thin air. I watched calmly from the kitchen as the color drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen gray. He stumbled backward away from the window, his chest heaving rapidly as he gasped for air. He bumped hard into the console table in the hallway. He could not even speak. He just pointed a shaking finger toward the front door in absolute terror. Carol, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic reality of the situation, crossed her arms and let out a loud, exasperated sigh. She rolled her eyes, convinced that this was nothing more than a minor suburban inconvenience. "It is just those nosy neighbors from across the street," Carol announced, her tone dripping with intense irritation as she smoothed down her apron. "I bet they heard Ashley shouting from the driveway and decided to come over here and ruin our holiday over a petty noise complaint. Mom, do not open that door." Brendan managed to choke out his voice, a hoarse and desperate whisper. He backed away toward the wooden staircase, looking exactly like a trapped animal, desperately searching for an escape route before the hunters arrived. But Carol was not used to taking orders from anyone, especially not in a house she had mentally claimed as her own personal territory. She waved her hand dismissively at him. Her chest puffed out with completely unearned authority. "Do not be ridiculous, Brendan," she scoffed loudly, marching right past him toward the foyer. "You are the man of the house, and you have absolutely nothing to hide. Let me handle this right now. I am going to give them a very serious piece of my mind." She stomped down the hallway, her sensible shoes clicking sharply against the polished wood floors. She was ready for a fight. She was ready to scream at a neighbor, completely unaware that she was walking directly into a nightmare. She reached the front door, grabbed the heavy solid brass handle and yanked it open with a dramatic and aggressive flourish. "What exactly is your problem?" Carol began to shout, stepping right into the doorway to physically block anyone from looking inside the house. "We are having a private family Thanksgiving dinner, and we absolutely do not need you banging on our door like a bunch of hooligans." But the angry words died completely in her throat the absolute second she looked up and truly realized her massive mistake. It was not the nosy neighbors from across the street. The people standing on my front porch were not holding a plate of apology cookies or wearing casual holiday sweaters. There were 5 imposing figures crowded onto the welcome mat. 2 of them were dressed in dark, heavy tactical vests with bright yellow lettering across the chest that clearly identified them as United States Marshals. Behind them stood two local police officers, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts, their expressions hard and unforgiving. Standing front and center, completely unfazed by Carol and her loud screaming, was a tall man in a sharp and incredibly expensive charcoal suit. He was holding a thick leather clipboard and staring down at my mother-in-law with a look of absolute cold corporate indifference. Carol's mouth fell open in shock. She took a tiny, involuntary step back, her hand flying up to cover her chest. The aggressive matriarch, who had spent the entire morning barking orders in my kitchen, was instantly reduced to a terrified and speechless old woman. The man in the suit did not introduce himself right away. He simply adjusted his glasses, looked right past Carol, and locked eyes with Brendan, who was cowering at the base of the staircase. The man in the suit stepped confidently over the threshold, completely ignoring Carol, as she stood frozen with her hand pressed against her chest. He walked with the heavy, purposeful stride of a corporate attorney who billed by the hour and did not tolerate any nonsense. He stopped a few feet away from Brendan, who was practically pressing himself into the wooden banister of the staircase. "Are you Brendan?" the man asked, his voice crisp and devoid of any emotion. Brendan swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between the attorney, the armed police officers, and the heavily armed United States Marshals standing just outside on the porch. He nodded slowly, too terrified to actually speak. The man in the suit pulled a thick, legally bound document from his leather clipboard and held it out. "I represent Apex Holdings, LLC, the new legal owners of this property. You are being served with an emergency notice to vacate." Brendan's hands shook so violently he could barely grasp the paperwork. He stared down at the bold red lettering across the top of the page. "This is a mistake," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You cannot evict us on Thanksgiving. We live here. This is my house." "It was your wife's house," the attorney corrected him sharply, tapping a polished finger against the document. "And she legally sold it to my clients. The final wire transfer cleared at exactly 5 o'clock this evening. The deed has been recorded electronically with the county clerk. You are currently standing on private corporate property, without a lease, without a rental agreement, and without the explicit permission of the owner." Carol suddenly snapped out of her shocked trance. She marched right up to the attorney, her face flushing with renewed, misguided anger. "Now you listen to me!" she shouted, waving her wooden spoon defensively. "You cannot just throw a family out into the cold. There are tenant protection laws in this state. You have to give us 30 days written notice. We have bags packed in the guest room. We established residency here." The attorney did not even blink. He looked down at Carol with the same mild annoyance one might reserve for a buzzing mosquito. "Ma'am," he replied smoothly, "tenant protection laws apply to individuals who actually pay rent or possess a valid lease agreement. You are simply a guest of the former owner. And the former owner, who happens to be standing right there in the kitchen, has officially revoked her invitation. Therefore, you are not tenants. You are squatters." Ashley let out a loud, hysterical sob from the kitchen doorway. She grabbed DeAndre's arm, trying to pull him toward the front door, but DeAndre yanked his arm away, still glaring at Brendan with pure hatred. One of the local police officers stepped forward, resting his hand casually on his duty belt. He had clearly dealt with entitled, angry homeowners before and had absolutely zero patience for Carol's screaming. He looked directly at Brendan, completely ignoring the frantic mother-in-law. "Look, buddy," the officer said, his tone heavy with absolute authority. "The paperwork is completely ironclad. The lawyers verified the deed transfer an hour ago at the station. The property changed hands at 5 o'clock. The new owners want you gone. Since you have no legal right to occupy this residence, you do not get 30 days. You do not even get 30 hours. Brendan looked wildly around the foyer, completely surrounded by law enforcement and corporate attorneys. His tech CEO facade was gone, replaced by the pathetic, sniveling reality of a man who had finally been caught. "Where are we supposed to go?" Brendan pleaded, tears welling up in his eyes. "All of our stuff is here. Our clothes, our furniture. You will have to arrange a supervised retrieval of your personal belongings through my office next week," the attorney answered coldly. "But tonight, you leave with whatever you can carry in your hands." Carol let out a piercing shriek. "This is illegal!" she screamed at the police officer. "You are supposed to protect us. Arrest this man. Arrest my daughter-in-law. She planned this whole thing to ruin my son." The police officer sighed, clearly exhausted by the screaming. He took a deliberate step toward Carol, pointing a stern finger directly at her face. "Ma'am, lower your voice right now, or I will put you in handcuffs for disorderly conduct." The officer warned, his voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "This is not a debate. You are currently trespassing on private property. According to the law, I am giving you exactly 15 minutes to gather your coats and vacate the premises. If any of you are still standing inside this house when that timer goes off, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing and hauled off to the county jail. The choice is yours, but the clock starts right now." He tapped his heavy wristwatch for emphasis, staring them down without any sympathy. The heavy silence that followed the police officer's ultimatum lasted for exactly 2 seconds before Carol completely lost her mind. The 15-minute countdown was the final shattering blow to her fabricated reality, and instead of accepting defeat, she doubled down on her delusional entitlement. She lunged forward, pointing her wooden spoon directly at the officer's chest, her face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You listen to me right now!" Carol screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the marble floors of the grand foyer. "You do not come into my home and tell me I have 15 minutes to leave. I know my rights. I know the mayor. I will have your badge for this. I am going to sue you. I am going to sue this entire police department, and I am going to sue this arrogant little corporate lawyer for emotional distress. You are all participating in an illegal scam orchestrated by a bitter, jealous woman who could not keep her own husband happy." The police officer did not flinch. He did not raise his voice or argue with her. He simply dropped his hand from his duty belt and reached directly for the silver handcuffs clipped to his side. He unsnapped the leather pouch with a loud, sharp click that made everyone in the room freeze. "Mom," the officer said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "I am going to give you exactly one warning, and I highly suggest you listen to every single word I say. You are currently interfering with a lawful eviction order. If you point that spoon at me again, or if you raise your voice to threaten me one more time, I will not wait for the 15-minute timer to run out. I will put you in handcuffs right now, drag you out of this house, and book you into the county jail for obstruction of justice and assaulting an officer. Do you understand me?" Carol stared at the shiny metal handcuffs. Her mouth opened and closed silently. The threat of actual physical arrest finally penetrated her thick skull. The spoon trembled in her hand before she slowly lowered it to her side. She took a tiny, defeated step backward, her eyes darting nervously toward Brendan for help. But Brendan was completely useless. He was leaning against the staircase banister, clutching his chest, and hyperventilating as he stared at the eviction notice still in his hand. Ashley burst into a fresh wave of hysterical tears. "Mom, just stop talking," Ashley sobbed, running her hands frantically through her hair. "We have to go. They are serious. They are actually going to throw us out in the cold. Brendan, do something. You told us we were safe. You told us this was your house." Brendan looked up, his face slick with sweat. He looked at the corporate attorney. "Please," Brendan begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "Just give us until tomorrow morning. It is Thanksgiving. We have a turkey in the oven. My mother is old. We cannot just pack up our entire lives into trash bags in 15 minutes. Have some basic human decency." The attorney adjusted his glasses, completely unmoved by the emotional display. "The law does not recognize holidays," he replied coldly, "and neither do my clients." 14 minutes. Panic finally set in. Total, absolute chaos erupted in the foyer. Ashley spun around and sprinted up the wooden staircase, screaming at DeAndre to help her grab their expensive designer clothes from the guest bedroom. Carol dropped her wooden spoon onto the floor and began running frantically toward the kitchen, completely abandoning her maternal protection of Brendan to save her own personal belongings. They were scrambling like rats on a sinking ship, shoving past each other in a desperate bid to salvage whatever material items they could carry. Brendan pushed himself off the banister, taking a shaky step toward the stairs to pack his own bags. He thought the worst thing happening to him today was losing the house. He thought the eviction was the climax of his punishment. But he was wrong. The nightmare had not even fully started yet. As Brendan reached for the handrail, the two local police officers suddenly stepped aside, clearing a path in the entryway. The two imposing figures wearing the dark tactical vests stepped forward, their heavy boots thudding loudly against the hardwood floor. The United States Marshals had stood silently on the porch the entire time, patiently letting the local police handle the civil property dispute. But they were not local police, and they certainly did not care about the eviction notice. "Hold it right there, Brendan!" The lead marshal barked, his voice carrying the absolute weight of the federal government. "Do not take another step toward those stairs." Brendan froze, his foot hovering over the first step. He slowly turned around, his eyes wide with renewed terror as he looked at the heavily armed men. "What is going on?" Brendan stammered. "The officer said we have 14 minutes to leave." The marshal reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a different document. It was not a civil notice. It was a federal warrant. "We do not care about the house," the marshal said, his eyes locking onto my terrified husband. "We are not here for the eviction. We are here for the bank fraud." The lead marshal stepped fully into the bright light of the foyer, his heavy boots planting firmly on the polished wood floor. "Brendan, you are under arrest for violation of federal statutes regarding wire fraud and the forgery of federal lending documents," the marshal announced, his voice completely devoid of any sympathy. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back right now." Brendan did not move. He was completely paralyzed, staring at the shiny steel cuffs as if they were a deadly weapon. "No," he whispered, shaking his head slowly in pure denial. "No, this is a massive mistake. I am a tech startup founder. I am a legitimate CEO. You cannot just walk into my house and arrest me. This is a civil matter. It is a simple marital dispute with my wife about our joint banking. It is not your house, and the federal government does not consider $300,000 of stolen equity to be a marital dispute," the marshal replied sharply. He closed the distance between them in two massive strides, grabbed Brendan firmly by the shoulder, and forcibly spun him around. "Turn around and stop resisting before I add another charge to your list." Brendan let out a pathetic yelp as the marshal yanked his arms behind his back. The sharp mechanical click of the handcuffs ratcheting tight echoed like a gunshot in the quiet foyer. Carol let out a blood-curdling scream, rushing forward to protect her boy, but the second marshal immediately stepped into her path. He held up a massive hand to physically block her advance. "Mom, stay exactly where you are," the second marshal warned, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "If you interfere with a federal arrest in any way, you will be going in the back of the transport van right alongside him." Carol stopped dead in her tracks, sobbing violently into her trembling hands. The aggressive matriarch had finally met an authority she could not yell at or manipulate. She had to stand there and watch her precious, brilliant son get treated exactly like the common criminal he was. Ashley stood completely frozen near the staircase, too shocked to even formulate a single word. Brendan twisted his neck, his eyes frantically searching the room until they finally locked onto me. He looked absolutely terrified. The arrogant smirk, the condescending tone, and the absolute confidence he had paraded around all morning were entirely gone. He was nothing but a desperate, broken man facing the total destruction of his entire life. "Natalie, please." Brendan begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. Tears streamed freely down his pale face, dripping off his chin onto his expensive tailored shirt. "Tell them to stop. Tell them it was just a marital dispute over shared finances. Tell them I had your explicit permission to sign that document for the business. We are married, Natalie. Spouses share assets all the time. Just tell them we had a verbal agreement, and this is all a huge misunderstanding. Please, I am begging you. I cannot go to federal prison. They will completely ruin me." I walked slowly out of the kitchen and stepped into the grand foyer, my heels clicking steadily against the hardwood. I stopped just a few feet away from my husband. I looked at the tight steel handcuffs cutting into his wrists. I looked at his tear-stained face. I thought about the 18 months he spent secretly draining my bank accounts while I worked 80-hour weeks. I thought about the nasty smirk on his face when he threw that forged deed onto my kitchen counter. I thought about the 22-year-old girl he carried across the threshold of a luxury apartment that I unknowingly paid for. "We do not share assets, Brendan," I said, my voice perfectly level and incredibly cold, "and we certainly do not share federal felonies. You made your choices the exact second you decided I was nothing more than a bank account to fund your pathetic double life." "But you are my wife," he sobbed, his knees buckling slightly so the marshal had to physically hold him upright by the collar. "You promised to love and support me." "I promised to be a partner," I corrected him smoothly. "You decided to be a parasite." I turned my attention away from my weeping husband and looked directly at the lead marshal. "Officer, I believe your Financial Crimes Division will need the supporting documentation for your investigation," I said in my crisp, professional tone. The marshal nodded, keeping a firm grip on Brendan. "The federal prosecutor will need everything you have, ma'am." I walked over to the hallway console table and opened the bottom drawer. I had placed it there early this morning, right before I started prepping the Thanksgiving turkey. I pulled out a thick, heavy 3-ring binder. I walked back and handed the neatly organized binder of forensic financial evidence directly to the marshal. "I spent the last month compiling this," I said. "Every forged signature, every wire transfer, and every hidden account is fully documented inside." The lead marshal took the heavy binder from my hands. He opened the thick cover, his eyes scanning the first page, which contained a perfectly summarized flowchart of the stolen funds. He let out a low whistle of genuine appreciation. "This is incredibly thorough work, ma'am," he noted, flipping to the second page where I had attached the verified bank wire logs. "Our forensic team usually spends months putting this kind of paper trail together. You just handed us a wrapped conviction on a silver platter." Brendan let out a pathetic groan, his head hanging in absolute defeat. He knew there was no talking his way out of hard data. But while all the attention was focused squarely on Brendan and the binder, someone else in the room realized exactly what that evidence meant for his own future. DeAndre had been standing near the kitchen entrance, completely silent since the marshals walked through the front door. He knew that my binder did not just contain Brendan's forged deed. It contained the fake invoices from Apex Marketing Solutions. It contained the exact routing numbers that proved he took a $30,000 cut for washing federal funds. He slowly took a step backward, his expensive leather shoes sliding silently across the hardwood floor. He took another step, putting the massive granite kitchen island between himself and the law enforcement officers in the foyer. His eyes darted nervously toward the sliding glass doors at the back of the house. If he could just get out the back, jump the tall wooden fence and disappear before the marshals processed the rest of the paperwork, he might be able to call a criminal defense attorney and figure out a survival strategy. He turned his back to the foyer and made a sudden, desperate dash for the rear exit. He did not make it very far. "Hey, hold it right there!" a loud voice barked from the hallway. One of the local police officers, who had been standing quietly near the front window, had been watching DeAndre the entire time. The officer sprinted past the kitchen island and intercepted DeAndre just as his hand touched the metal handle of the sliding glass door. The officer grabbed DeAndre by the shoulder of his custom suit jacket and yanked him backward with incredible force. "Where exactly do you think you are going, buddy?" the officer demanded, shoving DeAndre back toward the grand foyer. "I just needed some air," DeAndre stammered, holding his hands up defensively as the officer marched him right back into the center of the room. "I am feeling a little lightheaded. I have absolutely nothing to do with any of this. I was just going to step onto the patio." The second United States Marshal stepped forward, completely blocking DeAndre from moving another inch. He did not look amused by the pathetic excuse. DeAndre the Marshal stated, not asking a question, but delivering a hard, undeniable fact. "We know exactly who you are, and we know exactly what your role is in this scheme." The initial forensic accounting report we received earlier this afternoon clearly outlines the involvement of your shell company. You are being officially detained for questioning regarding your participation in the laundering of $300,000 of stolen federal funds through Apex Marketing Solutions. DeAndre panicked, waving his hands frantically as the reality of a federal prison sentence crashed down on him. "No, you have to listen to me," he pleaded, pointing a shaking finger directly at Brendan. "He lied to me. He told me it was legitimate venture capital. I did not know the money was stolen from his wife. I am a victim here too. I will testify against him. I will tell you everything you want to know. Just do not arrest me." The second marshal grabbed DeAndre by the arm, firmly securing him in place. "You can tell all of that to the federal prosecutor downtown," the marshal replied, coldly, pulling out a second pair of steel handcuffs. Ashley watched the scene unfold with absolute horror. Her entire world was collapsing in real time. Her brother was standing in federal handcuffs, sobbing like a child. Her husband was being hauled away for money laundering, eagerly offering to testify against his own family to save himself. The free luxury housing she had proudly claimed just an hour ago was now corporate property, and she had exactly 10 minutes left to pack her bags before being arrested for trespassing. The smug, arrogant woman who had marched into my kitchen demanding respect was entirely broken. Her knees literally buckled beneath her. She hit the ground so hard I could hear the impact against the stone floor. She collapsed onto the hard marble of the foyer, her designer dress pooling around her. She looked up at me, her face completely twisted in agony and despair. Tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. "You ruined our lives," Ashley screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing with raw, unfiltered devastation. "We have nothing." I looked down at Ashley, who was still sprawled across the marble floor in her ruined designer dress. Her wild accusations echoed through the grand foyer, but they did not even leave a single scratch on my conscience. "You ruined your own lives, Ashley," I replied calmly, stepping carefully around her trembling body, as if she were nothing more than a spilled glass of water. "You just expected me to keep paying for the privilege of watching you do it while you smiled in my face." I did not waste another second on her pathetic tears or her desperate pleas. I turned my back on the entire chaotic scene and walked directly toward the deep mahogany coat closet situated near the front entrance. While they were all scrambling around the house frantically trying to stuff their expensive clothes and stolen luxury goods into whatever bags they could find before the police timer ran out, I simply reached out and pulled the heavy closet door open. Sitting perfectly upright in the dark space was a single sleek black designer suitcase. I had packed it 3 days ago in complete secrecy. It contained all of my essential financial documents, my most valuable jewelry, and enough tailored clothes to last me a month in Europe. I reached down, grabbed the cool metal handle, and smoothly pulled it out onto the hardwood floor. The wheels glided silently across the polished wood. I did not need 15 minutes to pack up my life. I was already completely detached from this house and everyone inside of it. I wheeled my suitcase back through the foyer, navigating the absolute pandemonium that had consumed my former home. The lead United States Marshal was aggressively marching a weeping Brendan out the front door, his hands securely bound in heavy steel cuffs behind his back. Brendan did not even look at me as he was shoved outside into the freezing November air. DeAndre was actively resisting the second marshal, loudly citing his non-existent rights as a business owner, while being forcefully pushed toward a separate unmarked federal vehicle waiting in the driveway. The local police officers were now loudly barking orders at Ashley, telling her she had exactly 3 minutes left to vacate the premises or face immediate arrest for trespassing. She scrambled off the floor, slipping in her expensive heels as she frantically sprinted up the stairs to salvage whatever material wealth she could carry. The grand house, once a symbol of my hard work and their toxic entitlement, had been completely reduced to a chaotic crime scene filled with shouting law enforcement. I continued walking calmly toward the open front door, the gentle hum of my suitcase wheels serving as the perfect soundtrack to my final exit. But before I could reach the threshold, A trembling figure stepped directly into my path. It was Carol, the arrogant, commanding matriarch who had tried to banish me from my own kitchen just an hour earlier, was completely unrecognizable. Her perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess. Her eyes were wide red and swollen from crying over her arrested son. She was frantically clutching a heavy crystal decorative vase to her chest, as if it were a newborn child. It was the absolute most ridiculous thing she could have possibly chosen to save from an eviction, but her brain was clearly misfiring under the immense pressure of the situation. She stood blocking my exit, her chest heaving as she stared at my perfectly packed suitcase. She looked at my calm demeanor, then looked back at the flashing blue and red police lights illuminating the front lawn. The cold reality of the night had finally pierced through her thick wall of denial. She realized that her condo was sold. Her son was going to federal prison. Her daughter was about to be entirely homeless. She had absolutely nothing and nowhere to go. Natalie Carroll whispered, her voice cracking so badly she sounded like she was choking. Her hands shook violently, the heavy crystal vase rattling against her chest. "You cannot just leave us here like this. The police are actually going to throw us out onto the street. It is freezing outside, and it is Thanksgiving night. Every hotel in the city is fully booked for the holiday weekend. We do not even have a car because Brendan keys are locked inside. Please, you have to help me. I am an old woman and I am terrified. You have all that money from selling the house. Please, Natalie, just tell me where you are going. I need a place to stay tonight." I stared at the woman standing in front of me, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights pouring through the front window. She was actually asking me for a hotel room. After orchestrating a plan to steal my home after defending her son for forging my signature, and after watching high-definition video footage of him carrying a 22-year-old girl into a luxury apartment paid for by my stolen equity, she still believed I owed her something. The absolute entitlement was almost medically fascinating to witness. I let go of the metal handle of my suitcase. I did not raise my voice, but the coldness in my tone made her physically flinch. "You need a place to stay," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us. "That is truly unfortunate, Carol, because just an hour ago you explicitly told me that I was a small-minded, terrible wife who lacked the emotional capacity to understand a real family. You told me to go sit in the living room like a good little girl while you took over my kitchen. You were perfectly happy to throw me out onto the street and claim my 4,000-square-foot house as your own personal estate." Carol shook her head frantically, fresh tears spilling over her wrinkled cheeks. "I was just angry," she pleaded, her voice a desperate, breathy whisper. "I did not mean any of it. We are family, Natalie. You cannot hold a grudge on Thanksgiving." "Family," I echoed, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "Do not you ever dare use that word with me again. For 7 years I paid for every single family vacation. I paid for the luxury cars you and your husband drove. I paid off Ashley's student loans because you begged me to help her get a fresh start. And how did you repay me? You treated me like an ATM that you could occasionally insult. You constantly mocked my career, the very career that funded your entire pathetic existence, because I was not barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen." She tried to open her mouth to defend herself, but I cut her off instantly. "And today was the absolute grand finale." I continued, my voice echoing clearly through the grand foyer. "When you found out your son had committed a massive financial crime to steal my equity, you clapped your hands and called him brilliant. When you saw the undeniable proof that he was spending my money on a mistress a decade younger than me, you blamed me for working too many hours. You actually looked me in the eye and defended his infidelity because he is a man and I did not give him children." Carol looked down at the floor, the heavy crystal vase slipping slightly in her sweaty grip. She had absolutely no defense left. Every single toxic defense mechanism she had relied on for years had been systematically destroyed. "You enabled him," I said, leaning in so close she could not possibly escape my words. "You raised a weak, entitled little boy who thought he could steal from a forensic accountant and get away with it. You cheered him on while he dug his own grave. You made him believe that as long as he had the title of a man, the world would just bow down and hand him whatever he wanted. And now you get to sit back and watch him fall all the way to the bottom. Your son is a felon, Carol. Enjoy the guest wing of the county jail." The words hit her like a physical blow. She let out a loud, pathetic sob, her knees buckling slightly, as the finality of my statement completely broke her spirit. She had nothing else to say. There were no more lies to spin, no more manipulations to try. She was completely out of options. Before she could even attempt to formulate another plea, the heavy boots of the local police officer echoed sharply across the hardwood floor. He marched right up behind Carol, his hand resting firmly on his duty belt. "Time is up," the officer barked, his voice loud and completely devoid of any sympathy. "Everyone out, right now." Ashley came sprinting down the wooden staircase, slipping wildly on the bottom step. She was clutching a massive pile of designer handbags to her chest, but she had completely forgotten to grab a winter coat. Carol was still frozen in place, hugging the useless crystal vase. The officer did not hesitate. He grabbed Carol by the arm and physically marched her toward the open front door. A second officer grabbed Ashley, who was screaming hysterically as her expensive bags spilled onto the porch. They were shoved roughly over the threshold and out into the freezing November night, wearing absolutely nothing but their thin indoor Thanksgiving clothes. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them with a loud, final click. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see them shivering uncontrollably on the concrete porch, their teeth chattering in the bitter cold, as the reality of their sudden homelessness finally set in. I pulled the collar of my tailored wool coat tightly around my neck and stepped out of my former home for the very last time. The bitter November wind instantly hit my face, a sharp contrast to the heated chaos I had just left behind in the grand foyer. I pulled my designer suitcase over the threshold, the wheels clicking loudly against the stone porch. I walked right past Carol and Ashley, who were huddled together on the top step, shivering violently in their thin holiday blouses and completely ruined designer shoes. They did not even try to speak to me. The absolute shock of their new reality had finally silenced them completely. I walked down the concrete steps and onto the sprawling driveway. The entire cul-de-sac was lit up like a carnival. The flashing red and blue lights from the local police cruisers and the unmarked federal vehicles bounced off the manicured lawns and neighboring houses. Several of the wealthy neighbors had stepped out onto their front porches, wrapping their thick robes tightly around themselves as they watched the unbelievable spectacle unfolding in my driveway. The perfect tech CEO was being paraded in front of the neighborhood in federal steel handcuffs. The lead United States Marshal was guiding Brendan toward the back of a dark transport van parked near the curb. Brendan was stumbling, his expensive leather shoes dragging on the cold asphalt. His perfectly styled hair was a complete mess, hanging limply over his sweaty forehead. His custom-tailored suit, the one I had paid $3,000 for, was wrinkled and disheveled. He looked absolutely pathetic. As I walked down the driveway toward the street, Brendan suddenly snapped his head up. He saw me approaching, and a desperate light flickered in his bloodshot eyes. He planted his feet firmly on the pavement, refusing to take another step toward the transport van. The marshal yanked firmly on his arm, but Brendan threw his body weight backward, desperate to buy just a few more seconds. "Natalie, wait!" Brendan screamed, his voice tearing through the freezing night air. He ignored the federal agents pulling at him and focused entirely on me. "Please, just give me 1 minute. You have to listen to me." I did not stop walking. I simply adjusted my grip on my suitcase handle and kept my pace steady. A sleek black luxury sedan slowly pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It was the Uber Black I ordered 20 minutes ago while they were screaming at each other in the kitchen. The driver stepped out immediately, sensing the tension, and quickly moved to open the trunk for my luggage. "Natalie." "I love you, Brendan," wailed, his voice cracking into a high hysterical pitch that made the watching neighbors whisper among themselves. "I swear to you, I love you." That girl in the video meant absolutely nothing to me. She was just a stupid, meaningless mistake. I was under so much pressure with the business, And I felt inadequate because you made all the money. I just wanted to feel powerful for a minute, but she does not mean a single thing to me. You are my wife. You are the only woman I have ever truly loved. I handed my suitcase to the driver and watched him place it securely in the trunk. I turned around and looked at my husband. He was practically on his knees now, the marshals struggling to keep him upright. Please do not abandon me like this. Brendan sobbed, tears and snot running freely down his face. I will do whatever it takes to fix this. I will plead guilty to everything and keep DeAndre out of it. Just promise me you will be there when I get out. Promise me you will hire a good defense lawyer for me. We can rebuild everything, Natalie. I know you still love me. I walked over to the open door of the sleek black sedan. I slid into the warm, luxurious leather-back seat. The driver gently closed the door behind me, sealing me inside the quiet, comfortable interior. I pressed the button on the armrest, and the tinted rear window slowly rolled down, letting in a blast of the freezing night air one last time. Brendan stared right at me, his eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate hope. He actually thought his emotional manipulation was going to work. He thought the word love was a magic spell that could erase federal wire fraud and blatant infidelity. I know you still love me, Brendan, I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly over the cold wind. Because you only truly love my bank account. And that account is currently sitting in a private offshore trust you can never touch. I released the window switch, and the thick, tinted glass rolled up tightly, instantly sealing me inside the quiet, heated sanctuary of the luxury sedan. The freezing November wind and the frantic, hysterical sobbing of my former husband were completely cut off, replaced by the soft, steady hum of the expensive engine. I settled back into the plush leather seat and gave the driver a slight nod. He shifted the vehicle into drive and slowly pulled away from the curb, navigating smoothly past the maze of flashing police cruisers, blocking the wealthy suburban street. I turned my head and looked out the rear windshield to watch the final act of the absolute destruction I had orchestrated. The sprawling 4,000-square-foot mansion, the house that had been my personal prison of endless financial expectations for years, was already being secured by its new corporate owners. The sharp-suited attorney from the real estate firm stood on the wide concrete porch, his arms crossed over his chest, supervising a professional locksmith who was rapidly drilling out the heavy brass deadbolts. A local police officer stood right beside them, pulling a long roll of bright yellow police tape and stretching it tightly across the grand double doors, officially sealing off the property from the criminals who had tried to steal it. Further down the driveway, the United States Marshals were entirely finished listening to Brendan beg for mercy. The lead agent pressed a heavy hand down on Brendan's shoulder, forcing him to duck his head, and shoved him roughly into the dark, windowless back of the federal transport van. The heavy steel doors slammed shut with a brutal finality, locking away his tech startup delusions, his fake corporate workspace, and his stolen equity forever. He was entirely gone, swallowed up by the federal justice system he had so arrogantly thought he could outsmart. Parked just a few yards behind the federal van, a local police cruiser idled loudly with its red and blue lights painting the neighborhood brick facades. Through the reinforced steel cage of the rear window, I could clearly see DeAndre slumped over in the back seat. The slick, arrogant consultant, who had boldly walked into my kitchen, demanding a free luxury lifestyle, was now nothing more than a detained accessory to major financial fraud. His chin rested on his chest in absolute crushing defeat, fully realizing his fake marketing career and his freedom were completely over. The most pathetic sight, however, was reserved for the women shivering on the frozen curb. Ashley was sitting directly on the icy concrete of the street gutter, her ruined designer dress soaking up the freezing moisture. She had her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, violently shaking as she sobbed into her chest. The massive pile of expensive handbags she had desperately tried to salvage lay scattered uselessly around her feet in the dirty slush. Standing right beside her was Carol. The aggressively proud matriarch had somehow managed to grab a heavy ceramic casserole dish from the kitchen counter before the police officers forcefully pushed her out the door. She stood there, clutching the ridiculous dish to her chest, her thin holiday blouse completely failing to protect her from the biting winter cold. She stared blankly at the yellow police tape sealing off the front doors. Her hands were trembling so uncontrollably from the freezing temperature and the massive psychological shock that her fingers simply gave out. She lost her grip entirely. The heavy ceramic casserole dish plummeted from her hands and struck the frozen asphalt of the driveway with a loud, violent shatter. Thick chunks of ceramic and the heavy, half-cooked remains of her precious Thanksgiving dinner splattered in every direction across the pavement. Carol did not even flinch. She did not bend down to clean it up. She just stared at the ruined mess, a completely broken woman who finally realized she had absolutely no power, no home, and no family left to control. The Uber Black smoothly turned the corner at the end of the cul-de-sac, and the flashing police lights disappeared behind the tall oak trees. The heavy, suffocating tension that I had carried in my shoulders for the last 7 years completely evaporated into the warm air of the cabin. I took a deep, clear breath, feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of absolute freedom. A soft, sharp vibration buzzed from inside my designer handbag, resting on the seat next to me. I reached in and pulled out my cell phone, the bright screen illuminating the dark, quiet interior of the car. It was an encrypted text message from the senior managing partner at my forensic accounting firm. I unlocked the screen and read the brief, perfectly satisfying words. Execution flawless. See you in Paris on Monday. I replied to my boss with a simple thank you and locked my phone. That Monday, I did fly to Paris. I drank espresso at street cafes, audited European corporate mergers by day, and completely ignored the frantic voicemails from my former in-laws by night. The geographical distance was just the physical manifestation of the emotional detachment I had already achieved. Now 6 months have passed since that explosive Thanksgiving night, and the dust has finally settled over the absolute wreckage of their lives. The federal justice system moves incredibly fast when the financial evidence is handed to them in a perfectly organized binder. Brendan initially tried to play the role of the misunderstood entrepreneur, begging the judge for leniency. He expected his mother to hire a high-powered defense attorney to save him. But Carol had absolutely no money left. Without my income to subsidize his defense, he was forced to rely on an overworked public defender who took one look at my forensic report and advised him to surrender. Facing 20 years if he went to trial, Brendan broke down and took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 5 full years in a federal penitentiary. The man who once bragged about hosting venture capitalists in a luxury downtown penthouse now spends his afternoons working in the prison laundry room, earning less than $1 an hour. DeAndre did not fare much better, though he narrowly escaped a prison cell. The absolute second the federal prosecutors offered him a deal, he turned against Brendan. He testified to everything, admitting that Apex Marketing Solutions was nothing more than a fraudulent shell company designed to wash stolen money. Because of his cooperation, he avoided jail time but was handed 2 years of strict federal probation. The government completely seized his business assets, dissolved his LLC, and heavily fined him. His reputation as a high-end corporate consultant was permanently destroyed. He now works as a mid-level shift manager at a discount electronics store, a far cry from the custom-tailored suits and luxury lifestyle he thought my money would buy him. As for Ashley and Carol, their grand plans of turning my home into their rent-free family estate collapsed in the most humiliating way possible. With Brendan in prison and DeAndre wages heavily garnished to pay federal fines, the women had absolutely zero financial safety nets. They were forced to move into a cramped, dingy one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Ashley, who once turned her nose up at anything that did not have a designer label, now works the customer service return desk at a local department store. Carol had to swallow her massive pride and take a part-time job as a cashier at a grocery store just to help cover their meager rent. They spend their days ringing up the exact same neighbors they used to brag to, completely stripped of their unearned arrogance. While they were busy adjusting to their new lives at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, I was busy tying up the final legal loose end. Yesterday morning, I walked into the family courthouse to finalize my divorce. Brendan attended via a video link from the federal prison wearing a standard issue orange jumpsuit. Even from behind bars, his sheer audacity remained intact. His court-appointed family lawyer actually attempted to file a motion for spousal support, arguing that I was the primary breadwinner during the marriage, and he was now entirely destitute. He wanted alimony. He wanted me to continue funding his life even while he sat in a prison cell for stealing from me. I did not even have to speak. My attorney simply handed the judge the federal conviction records detailing the $300,000 fraud and the forged quitclaim deed. The judge took one look at the paperwork, scoffed out loud in the middle of the courtroom, and immediately dismissed the alimony claim with extreme prejudice. The marriage was officially dissolved, and the judge ruled that Brendan forfeited any and all rights to my financial assets the exact moment he committed federal wire fraud against me. I walked out of that courthouse without giving up a single penny. Now, as I sit here at a small marble table outside a high-end cafe in the heart of Paris, sipping a perfectly brewed double espresso and enjoying a fresh butter croissant, I can finally appreciate the absolute quiet. The morning sun is reflecting off the cobblestone streets, and the only sound is the gentle hum of the city waking up. The air smells of rich coffee and freedom. There is no one screaming at me across a granite island. There is no one demanding my paycheck to fund their delusions. There is no one telling me I am a failure of a wife because I refuse to be a financial hostage. I am completely, beautifully alone, and I have never felt more powerful in my entire life. For years, I bought into the greatest lie society sells to successful women. The lie that no matter how much you achieve, your ultimate value is determined by your ability to keep a family together. We are constantly conditioned to be the bigger person, to compromise our own sanity, to shrink ourselves so the men in our lives can feel tall. We are told to forgive the unforgivable, to excuse the disrespect, and to silently endure the abuse, just to maintain the perfect illusion of a happy home. Carol spent her entire life enforcing that toxic narrative. She genuinely believed that because I was a woman, my money, my property, and my very identity belonged to her son, simply because he existed. But staying quiet does not keep the peace. It merely funds the war against your own self-respect. Brendan thought my role as a wife meant I was a blind, obedient safety net. He mistook my grueling work ethic for domestic submission. He assumed that because I was a woman who valued marriage, I would lack the spine to legally destroy him when he betrayed me. That was his fatal mistake, and it is a mistake thousands of toxic partners make every single day. They rely on our emotional attachment to blind us to their financial abuse. They count on us being too exhausted by the daily grind to check the bank statements or read the fine print. That is exactly why financial literacy is not just a career skill. For women, it is the ultimate armor. Earning your own money is only half the battle. You have to know how to aggressively protect it. You need to understand what your name is attached to. You must pull your credit reports. You need to know how deeds are recorded, how equity lines are drawn, and how banking alerts function. When you understand the math, you remove the emotion. When you remove the emotion, manipulative people can no longer use guilt to empty your bank accounts. Brendan thought he could outsmart me with a fake signature, but my financial literacy built the federal trap that caught him. Knowledge is not just power. It is absolute freedom. To all the women watching this, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You do not owe your success to people who treat you like a stepping stone. You do not owe your sanity to in-laws who disrespect you in your own home. And you certainly do not owe a single penny of your hard-earned wealth to a partner who views you as a permanent automated teller machine. Setting boundaries is not enough when you are dealing with parasites. You have to enforce those boundaries with ruthless, unapologetic action. Do not wait for them to change. Do not wait for them to apologize. Cut the financial cord and let them fall. It took me a long time to realize that walking away from a toxic marriage was not a failure. It was the most successful transaction I have ever executed. I reclaimed my name. I protected my assets, and I finally chose myself over the comfort of cowards. If my story resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with any woman who needs a reminder of her own worth. Leave a comment below and tell me how you have taken your power back from toxic people. Never let anyone make you feel small or insignificant in a life you built with your own two bare hands. You are the absolute architect of your own future, and you hold all the leverage. The next time someone tells you to get out of your own kitchen, sell the house with them inside it. The story of Natalie and her toxic in-laws highlights a profound truth that many women learn too late. Financial literacy is not just a professional skill, it is the ultimate armor against manipulation. Society frequently pressures women to act as the emotional shock absorbers in their families, enduring disrespect and compromising their own boundaries to maintain the fragile illusion of a happy home. In toxic dynamics, abusers often weaponize this societal conditioning. They rely on the arrogant assumption that you will be too emotionally invested, too exhausted, or too forgiving to notice when you are being used. Brendan and his family believed that because Natalie was a wife, she would blindly accept his financial theft and blatant infidelity as long as they threw the word family in her face. But Natalie flipped the script. Her deep understanding of her own assets, credit, and legal rights gave her the clarity to see the betrayal not as a marital misunderstanding, but as a calculated crime. When you understand your money, you remove the heavy fog of emotional manipulation. You stop waiting for abusers to suddenly develop a conscience, and instead, you build an ironclad exit strategy based on hard facts. Financial independence allows you to set boundaries that actually hold weight. It gives you the power to walk away from tables where you are no longer respected, and if necessary, to sell the entire house out from under those who try to exploit you. True empowerment begins the exact moment you stop funding your own disrespect and start prioritizing your absolute peace of mind. If this message resonated with you today, take 5 minutes right now to review your personal bank statements and hit the subscribe button to join a community of women reclaiming their financial power.